We believed the conquest of Earth would be routine. The Dominion had ended greater civilizations than this one, worlds with planetary shields, empires that spanned star systems, species that had mastered antimatter warheads and gravitational weapons. They all fell the same way. First came the sky, then came the silence, and finally, surrender. Earth, according to our analysts, would not even reach the final stage. I remember the moment their planet first appeared on our tactical displays, a blue sphere rotating peacefully around an ordinary star. Their communications filled the void around them, billions of signals, chaotic and uncoordinated. They called it the Internet. To us, it looked like noise. Dominion intelligence dissected their technology within minutes. Their weapons were primitive, chemical explosives. Their space capabilities barely reached their own moon. Their governments were divided into hundreds of rival nations. A fractured species, weak, predictable, easy. Our high command approved the invasion without hesitation, and so at dawn, on what humans called a Wednesday, the sky above Earth changed. Dominion carrier fleets exited hyperspace across the entire planet simultaneously. Gigantic warships unfolded from the void, metallic giants longer than human cities. Their hulls glowed with the cold light of shield generators as they took position over continents. From orbit, Earth looked small beneath us, fragile. Our arrival eclipsed the sun over half the planet. Human satellites attempted to identify the objects in their sky. Their defense networks scrambled to respond. It was almost admirable. Missiles launched from dozens of countries. Fighter jets roared upward from air bases across the world. Naval fleets activated radar systems and scrambled aircraft carriers. Humanity was trying to fight, but their war belonged to an earlier age. Dominion electronic warfare pulses rippled across the atmosphere like invisible lightning. EMP storms followed. Entire continents went dark. Cities that had glowed brilliantly only seconds before suddenly vanished into shadow. Electrical grids collapsed. Communication systems died mid-transmission. Their satellites were the next to fall, hundreds of them, one by one. Precision orbital strikes erased them from the sky before human operators could even understand what was happening. Earth's digital nervous system collapsed in less than 2 minutes. And then the air war began. Human fighter jets rose through the clouds like swarms of insects, climbing desperately toward the massive silhouettes that hovered above their world. We watched them approach. Thousands of tiny machines charging at ships millions of times their size. Their pilots showed remarkable courage, but courage does not defeat physics. Dominion shield barriers shimmered to life around our carriers, vast energy fields that could withstand nuclear bombardment. The first wave of human missiles struck seconds later. Explosions blossomed across our shields like brief sparks against glass, harmless. Human pilots fired everything they had, rockets, cannons, guided missiles. None of it mattered. Our point defense cannons activated. Blue beams lanced across the atmosphere. One moment, the human fighters were there. The next moment, they were fragments burning through the clouds. Within 30 minutes, Earth's air forces ceased to exist. The ground forces lasted longer. Human militaries mobilized across continents, deploying tanks, artillery, and anti-air batteries. Missiles continued launching even after their targeting systems failed. Some weapons struck our lower landing craft, but Dominion armor had been designed to endure asteroid impacts. Human explosives barely scratched the surface. Our ground armies landed within hours. Tall armored soldiers descended from dropships across the planet, towering figures of alloy plating and energy rifles. Cities that resisted were subdued quickly. Shock weapons paralyzed entire battalions. Orbital cannons destroyed military headquarters. Governments collapsed one by one. Within 72 hours, Earth surrendered. It was faster than predicted. Human leaders were detained, military forces disarmed, population centers placed under occupation control. Standard procedure. Across the Dominion, Reports classified the campaign as a flawless victory, another world added to the empire. But that was when I noticed the first irregularity: the prisoners. In most conquered species, the early days of occupation are emotional. Fear dominates everything. Panic spreads through the population. Civilians beg their conquerors for protection, mercy, anything that might ensure survival. Humans behaved differently. They did not beg. They did not scream. When we gathered them into containment zones, they walked in silence. When our soldiers cataloged them for labor assignments, they cooperated without resistance. But they stared at us, always staring. At first, I believed it was hatred. Many conquered species display hatred during the early stages of occupation, but the translators analyzing human facial expressions detected something else, something far stranger: calm. Even when our ships hovered above their cities, even when their leaders were dragged away in restraints, humans watched us with quiet, steady eyes. I remember observing one group during the first containment transfer. A line of civilians stood beneath the shadow of our transport craft. Families, workers, children clutching small possessions. One of our guards shouted at them to move faster. They obeyed. But a human male near the center of the group paused before boarding. He looked up at the massive Dominion carrier above the clouds, not with fear, not with despair. He simply studied it, like a scientist observing an experiment. Then he turned and joined the others. That moment stayed with me. I recorded it in my official occupation log later that cycle. Human population displays unusual emotional stability during post-conquest processing, psychological response inconsistent with other species. At the time, I dismissed it as cultural stubbornness. After all, the war was already over. Earth had fallen. Humanity had been conquered, or so we believed. History would later record that moment, the silence of the prisoners, as the first warning sign, the first indication that we had misunderstood the species we invaded, because while the Dominion believed the war had ended, the humans seemed to believe something very different. They behaved as if the war had not truly begun. And in the years that followed, the galaxy would learn the terrible truth behind that quiet confidence. Conquering Earth had been easy. Conquering humanity was something else entirely. And we were about to find out why. Every conquered species breaks. It is one of the oldest truths in Dominion military doctrine. No matter how advanced their technology, no matter how proud their civilizations, when the sky burns and their armies collapse, fear always wins in the end. We have studied this pattern across thousands of worlds. The timeline is remarkably consistent. Within the first few days, panic spreads through the population. Within the first week, survivors begin begging their conquerors for protection. And within a few short months, the conquered begin cooperating with the new rulers who now control their lives. Fear is efficient. Fear is predictable. Fear builds empires. Earth was supposed to follow the same pattern. Instead, 3 weeks after the conquest, something began to feel profoundly wrong. I first noticed it during my routine inspection of Containment Sector 12. The facility held nearly 40,000 human prisoners, civilians gathered from the surrounding cities and relocated for processing. The structure itself was a massive metallic enclosure constructed by Dominion engineers in less than a day. Tall perimeter walls, automated weapon turrets, observation towers. Inside, the humans were divided into orderly sections according to age, health, and labor classification. By all metrics, the facility was operating perfectly. But the prisoners, they were behaving incorrectly. I stood in the upper observation deck watching them through the transparent shield barrier. Groups of humans sat together on the ground, quietly talking among themselves. Others walked slowly between the rows of temporary shelters our engineers had installed. None were fighting. None were panicking. Instead, they were cooperating. I watched one human female distribute small portions of food among a group of children. She gave away most of her own ration without hesitation. Nearby, an elderly human struggled to stand. 3 strangers immediately helped him up. No orders had been given. No authority had organized them. They simply did it. At first, Dominion analysts believed this was merely a temporary survival instinct, but the behavior continued. Days passed. Then weeks. Human prisoners began forming communities inside the camps. They shared supplies. They rotated responsibilities for cleaning and maintenance. They even created small learning circles where older humans taught the younger ones stories, mathematics, and history. It was unprecedented. Most conquered populations collapse into chaos after defeat. Violence spreads. Food shortages cause riots. Humans did the opposite. The more pressure we applied, the more united they became. But the most disturbing behavior appeared during our psychological tests. Dominion scientists began studying the human prisoners to understand their unusual stability. Standard intimidation protocols were initiated. The first test involved a controlled fear demonstration. Across the galaxy, this method is extremely effective. Dominant predators or military enforcers display overwhelming force in close proximity to the prisoners. The result is almost always immediate submission. When the demonstration began in Sector 12, dozens of Dominion soldiers marched into the containment yard wearing full combat armor. Their rifles hummed with lethal energy. Heavy combat walkers followed behind them, towering over the prisoners like metal giants. The goal was simple. Remind the humans who controlled their fate. The prisoners watched the soldiers approach. Some stood. Others continued sitting calmly. A Dominion officer activated his weapon and fired a blast into the air, creating a thunderous shockwave that echoed across the camp. Several children flinched, but the adults did not. Instead, one of the humans laughed. The sound spread quickly. Within seconds, more humans were laughing quietly among themselves. The soldiers stood frozen in confusion. The demonstration ended early. The scientists labeled it an anomaly. The second test involved isolation. Human prisoners who showed signs of leadership were removed from the population and placed in solitary confinement cells deep beneath the facility. Isolation breaks most species within hours. Silence is one of the most powerful psychological weapons in existence. After 12 hours, the monitoring systems inside the cells recorded the first sound from the human prisoners. It was not crying. It was not pleading. They were singing. Low, rhythmic songs filled the empty corridors of the detention block. Soon, the sound spread from one cell to another. Within minutes, the entire isolation wing echoed with human voices. The guards reported the experience as unsettling. The third test was far harsher: public execution. Across the Dominion, executions are the final method used to shatter resistance movements. When a population witnesses the death of its leaders, morale collapses almost instantly. We selected 3 prisoners identified as organizers within the camps. They were brought to the central yard. Thousands of humans were forced to watch. The Dominion officer overseeing the procedure announced their crimes and activated the execution device. 3 bright flashes. 3 bodies falling. The yard became silent. For several seconds, no one moved. Dominion analysts expected screams, grief, panic. Instead, the humans slowly stood, not in protest, not in surrender. They simply stood, together, watching the place where their leaders had fallen. No one spoke, but the expression on their faces was unmistakable. Resolve. The effect spread like a silent wave through the crowd. That moment was the first time Dominion Command began to worry, because the execution had done the opposite of its intended purpose. It had strengthened them. The reports on my desk grew stranger with every passing day. Guards overheard prisoners, repeating the same phrase over and over again. At first, translators believed it was a form of religious chant, but after analyzing thousands of recordings, the meaning became clear. The humans were saying, "You only captured Earth. You didn't capture humanity." The phrase appeared everywhere, in conversations, in songs, even scratched into the metal walls of the containment facilities. Dominion High Command dismissed it as meaningless defiance. But something else began happening shortly afterward. Small, unexplained failures. Power grids malfunctioned. Security doors opened unexpectedly. Cargo shipments vanished during transport. At first, these incidents seemed random, minor technical errors, but they kept happening, over and over again. Across multiple occupation zones, a generator explosion in one city, a supply convoy disappearing in another, communication relays mysteriously failing during critical operations. None of the sabotage events were large enough to cause major damage, and none were organized enough to trace. But they were constant, like small cracks slowly spreading through the foundation of a massive structure. Dominion commanders began referring to them as inconveniences. Yet the number of incidents doubled every week, then tripled. Soon every occupation report included at least one unexplained malfunction. It was as if the entire planet itself had become hostile to our presence. One night, while reviewing the latest sabotage logs, I found myself staring at the same question repeated across multiple reports. The words were written by different officers on different continents, but they all asked the same thing. How were the humans doing this? They had no weapons, no communication systems, no organized military remaining. And yet, our occupation network was slowly bleeding from 1,000 invisible wounds. For the first time in centuries, Dominion commanders began considering an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps the conquest of Earth had not gone as smoothly as we believed. Perhaps we had misunderstood the species we captured. And if that was true, then the quiet calm of the human prisoners might not have been surrender at all. It might have been patience, the kind of patience predators show, just before they strike. And somewhere beyond the containment walls of Earth, something was already beginning to move. Empires are not built with weapons. Weapons win battles. Empires are built with fear. That truth is older than the Dominion itself. Long before our species reached the stars, our ancestors learned a lesson every ruling civilization eventually discovers. Control the enemy's fear, and you control the enemy. Across thousands of conquered worlds, that principle never failed. Species fear extinction. They fear pain. They fear the suffering of their families and the destruction of their homes. Fear breaks resistance faster than any weapon. And so the Dominion perfected it. Entire military doctrines were built around psychological collapse. Our fleets appeared suddenly. Our attacks were overwhelming. Our displays of power were absolute. The message was always the same. Resistance is hopeless. Submit and survive. It worked every time, until we met humanity. 3 weeks after the conquest of Earth, Dominion High Command ordered a full psychological analysis of the species. Something about the humans disturbed our strategists. They were not behaving like conquered people. So the scientists began studying them, not just their current behavior, their entire history. Every civilization leaves records, cultural transmissions, historical archives, data networks. Humanity had preserved an enormous amount of information about its own past. We accessed all of it. Billions of documents, thousands of recorded conflicts, centuries of social development. At first, the data seemed chaotic. Human history was filled with violence, internal wars, and political division. Entire nations had risen and fallen across the centuries. But the deeper the researchers looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Humans had survived disasters that would have wiped out most civilizations, plagues that killed millions, wars that consumed entire continents, economic collapses, environmental catastrophes. Over and over again, their world had nearly destroyed itself. And yet, humanity endured. Civilizations collapsed, and humans rebuilt them. Cities burned, and humans constructed new ones on the ashes. Entire generations were lost, and the survivors continued forward. The Dominion analysts began to realize something unsettling. Most intelligent species evolve during long periods of stability. Peace encourages technological progress. Cooperation strengthens societies. Humanity was different. Their species had evolved inside chaos, conflict, struggle, hardship. From their earliest civilizations, humans had lived in a world where survival was uncertain. Fear was not an unusual experience for them. It was normal, which meant something extraordinary had happened to their psychology. Fear did not paralyze humans. Fear motivated them. The realization spread quietly through Dominion leadership circles. If fear could not control humanity, then our most reliable weapon had become useless. But while the analysts debated theory, the occupation of Earth continued to deteriorate. Inside the detention camps, human communities grew stronger every day. Isolation protocols failed repeatedly. Whenever we separated groups of prisoners, they found new ways to reconnect. If we removed communication devices, they invented signals using body language. If we monitored spoken language, they switched to coded phrases. In one facility, guards reported that prisoners were communicating through the rhythm of clapping games played by children. In another, messages were hidden inside simple drawings passed between families. Music became another method. Songs spread from one section of the camp to another, carrying meanings that our translators struggled to interpret. Human communication adapted faster than our monitoring systems could respond. It was as if their entire species had practiced resisting control for centuries. Dominion intelligence eventually reached a conclusion. If fear alone would not break them, then fear must be amplified, not directed at individuals, but at their entire civilization. And so a strategic decision was made, a demonstration, a single act of overwhelming destruction that would remind humanity of the power they faced. An entire city would be eliminated, publicly. The attack would be broadcast across every human detention facility on Earth. Millions of prisoners would watch the destruction in real time. The message would be undeniable. Submit, or your species will vanish. I was assigned to oversee the broadcast. The selected target was one of Earth's largest cities, a sprawling human population center filled with millions of civilians. The orbital strike platforms moved into position above the planet's atmosphere. Dominion technicians prepared the transmission network. Screens were installed inside every containment facility. Prisoners were ordered to gather in the viewing areas. I stood inside the primary control chamber as the final preparations began. From orbit, the city looked peaceful. Lights flickered across the landscape as evening settled over the region. Roads glowed with moving vehicles. Buildings stretched toward the sky in endless rows. Human life continuing normally, unaware of the decision that had already sealed their fate. The countdown clock appeared on the broadcast screens. Across Earth, millions of prisoners were forced to watch. Our analysts predicted panic would spread immediately. But when I turned my attention to the observation monitors, I saw something unexpected. The humans were watching quietly. Entire crowds stood in the detention yards, staring at the massive screens suspended above them. Some whispered to each other. Others held their children close, but they were not begging. They were not pleading with the guards. Instead, they were studying the screens, studying us. The technicians in the control room continued their work, unaware of the change happening below. But something about the humans' expressions began to disturb me. I switched between multiple observation feeds from camps around the planet. Thousands of prisoners. Millions. Everywhere the same reaction. Not fear. Something else. Their faces were hard. their posture tense. Some clenched their fists. Others stared at the screen with a cold intensity I could not explain. Then I realized what I was seeing. Anger. Not the chaotic anger of a desperate population. Something deeper. Controlled. Focused. The emotions spread through the crowds like a silent signal. And in that moment, a realization crept into my thoughts, one I did not record in the official reports. We had intended this demonstration to break human morale. But watching those prisoners, watching the fire building in their eyes, I began to wonder if we had just done the opposite. The countdown clock continued ticking towards zero, orbital cannons aligned with their target far below. Across Earth, millions of humans watched the sky in silence. And for the first time since the conquest began, I felt something I had never experienced during an invasion. Uncertainty. Because the species we were trying to frighten did not look afraid at all. The Dominion did not choose its targets randomly. Every act of destruction during an occupation is calculated with precision. Fear must be measured, applied carefully. Too little, and resistance continues. Too much, and the population becomes unpredictable. For Earth, High Command selected a city whose destruction would echo across the entire human world. A place of ancient history, a population counted in the millions, a symbol of civilization older than many species in the Dominion. The city was called New Delhi. From orbit, it stretched across the planet like a glowing constellation of lights, roads, towers, rivers of vehicles moving through the night. To the Dominion, it was merely coordinates on a tactical display. To humanity, it was home. Our bombardment platforms aligned above the atmosphere, hovering silently beyond the reach of human weapons. Each platform carried weapons capable of leveling continents. But for this demonstration, only one strike was necessary. Precision destruction, total visibility. Every detention facility on Earth had been equipped with broadcast screens. Millions of human prisoners were forced into viewing areas under the watchful barrels of Dominion rifles. They were ordered to witness the fate of their world. The message was simple: submit or perish. Inside the orbital command chamber, I stood beside the central transmission console. The control room glowed with holographic displays tracking the city below. Targeting reticles locked onto critical infrastructure points, transport hubs, government buildings, power grids. The strike would be devastating. Total collapse within seconds. Behind me, Dominion officers monitored the global broadcast. Feeds, every containment camp across the planet streamed into the observation screens surrounding us. Millions of humans stared upward from prison yards, watching, waiting. The countdown clock appeared above the primary display. 00D. 10 minutes, until orbital fire. I expected chaos to erupt across the camps the moment the humans realized what was coming. Fear should have spread instantly. But the crowds remained still. I zoomed one of the observation feeds. Thousands of prisoners stood in silence beneath the night sky. Some held children in their arms. Others rested hands on the shoulders of those beside them. Their faces were illuminated by the blue glow of the broadcast screens. They understood what they were about to see, and yet they did not beg. 0732. A Dominion officer leaned toward me. "Commander Virek," he said quietly. "Psychological. Collapse should have begun already." I said nothing. My attention was fixed on the crowd. One human moved. A man near the center of the detention yard slowly stood up from where he had been sitting. For a moment I assumed he intended to protest. But he said nothing. He simply stood there, staring at the sky. Another human rose beside him, then another, and another. Within seconds, the movement spread through the crowd like ripples through water. Humans stood, one by one, silently. No orders were given, no signal was visible. Yet, across the detention yard, thousands of people rose to their feet. I switched to another broadcast feed. In a different city, the same thing was happening. Rows of prisoners slowly standing together. Another camp. Another crowd rising in silence. Across the planet, the pattern repeated. Millions of humans stood beneath the sky. Not kneeling, not surrendering, standing, facing the orbital weapons that would soon destroy one of their greatest cities. The Dominion officers in the control chamber exchanged uneasy glances. "This behavior is irregular," one analyst muttered. The countdown continued. 04:55. Some of the humans raised their fists. Others placed hands over their hearts. In several camps, prisoners performed a gesture unfamiliar to our translators, a rigid motion bringing their hands to their foreheads before lowering them again. Later, we would learn it was called a salute, a sign of respect. They were saluting, the city about to die. The realization unsettled me. These humans were not reacting to the broadcast as victims. They were reacting as witnesses, participants in something larger. Then another sound reached our monitoring systems. At first, it was faint. A single voice among thousands. One human had begun singing. The language translation algorithms struggled to interpret the lyrics, but the melody carried clearly across the microphones. Low, steady, defiant. Another voice joined, then another. Soon, entire groups of prisoners were singing together. The sound spread from camp to camp like a rising tide. Millions of voices, unified. The Dominion translators scrambled to analyze the meaning. At last, the emotional analysis program returned its conclusion. The song was not mourning. It was not prayer. It was not grief. It was a declaration. The translated phrase appeared on the display beside me. "We will not break." The words echoed through the command chamber like a challenge. The countdown reached its final minute. 00:59. Below us, the city of New Delhi continued its evening routines, unaware that its final seconds were approaching. Above them, the Dominion bombardment platform completed its targeting lock. Energy surged through the weapon systems. Inside, the control room, every officer watched the main display. But my eyes had returned to the observation feeds, to the humans, millions of them standing in their camps, singing, facing the sky. Their city was about to burn. Their conquerors expected terror. Instead, they were showing resolve. In that moment, a strange thought entered my mind. What if the demonstration failed? What if destroying their city did not frighten them? What if it only proved something they already believed? The countdown reached 0. The orbital cannon fired. A beam of blinding white energy lanced downward through the atmosphere. From orbit, it looked like a spear of light piercing the planet. Seconds later, the city vanished. A massive explosion consumed the skyline as shockwaves rolled across the landscape. Entire districts collapsed instantly. Firestorms erupted where buildings once stood. The cameras transmitted everything. Across the camps, the humans watched their city die. The singing did not stop. If anything, it grew louder. Dominion officers stared at the screens in disbelief. The demonstration had been designed to break them. Instead, the destruction seemed to strengthen their resolve. One analyst whispered something I will never forget. They already expected this. He was right. The humans had known what we were capable of. They had prepared themselves for loss, for sacrifice, for destruction, which meant our greatest weapon, fear, had already failed. I stood in the silent command chamber as the burning ruins of the city filled the broadcast screens. And for the first time since the invasion began, I felt doubt. Because the species watching those flames did not look defeated. They looked ready. Ready for something terrible. Ready for something inevitable. And somewhere deep inside me, A quiet realization began to grow. The Dominion had just destroyed a city, but in doing so, we might have ignited a war we did not understand. The moment the city died, the war began. For several seconds after the orbital strike, the planet seemed frozen in silence. The burning ruins of New Delhi filled every broadcast screen across Earth. Firestorms consumed entire districts. Towers collapsed into clouds of ash and smoke. Millions of human prisoners stared at the devastation. Dominion analysts expected what usually followed such displays: panic, despair, submission. Instead, something else happened. The singing stopped, and the humans moved. It began in the detention yards. At first, the motion seemed chaotic. Individual prisoners shifting positions, stepping forward, raising their heads. Then the first attack occurred. A human male near the perimeter fence suddenly lunged toward a Dominion guard. He carried no weapon, only a length of broken metal taken from a damaged shelter frame. The guard fired instantly. The human fell, but another human charged forward before the body even hit the ground. Then another, and another. Within seconds, dozens of prisoners rushed the security line. Across the yard, tools, chains, and shattered equipment became weapons. The guards opened fire. Energy bolts struck the crowd, dropping humans in waves. But the prisoners did not retreat. They kept coming, in every direction, across the entire camp. Alarms blared through the containment complex as automated turrets activated. Blue energy blasts tore through the advancing prisoners. Still they came, climbing the fences, dragging wounded comrades out of the line of fire, hurling debris at the guards. The Dominion soldiers were stunned. This was not how conquered species behaved. No population attacked heavily armed soldiers without hope of victory. Survival instinct should have forced them to flee. But the humans were not trying to survive. They were trying to fight. I switched the command screens to other containment facilities. The same scene unfolded everywhere. In South America, prisoners overwhelmed a watchtower using construction equipment they had hidden beneath a shelter floor. In Europe, a group of civilians disabled an automated turret by covering its sensors with blankets and debris before storming the perimeter gate. In Africa, prisoners used improvised ladders made from bed frames to scale the containment walls. None of these uprisings appeared coordinated, yet they erupted simultaneously across the entire planet. It was as if millions of humans had received the same invisible signal. Later, we realized the truth. The orbital strike had been the signal. The humans had been waiting for it. Weeks earlier, Dominion intelligence had reported strange behaviors inside the camps. Prisoners passing coded messages, groups gathering quietly after nightfall, songs spreading between sections. At the time, we believed it was cultural bonding. Now we understood. They had been organizing, preparing, planning for the moment when resistance would become inevitable, and the destruction of their city had ignited it. Across Earth, detention centers transformed into battlefields. Human prisoners surged through corridors and service tunnels, overwhelming isolated guards with sheer numbers. Improvised weapons appeared everywhere: broken tools, metal fragments, electrical cables turned into choking wires. One group dismantled an entire maintenance vehicle and used its heavy frame as a battering ram against a reinforced gate. Within minutes, Containment Sector 12 lost internal communications. Then the power grid collapsed. The surveillance systems flickered and died. Entire sections of the facility vanished from the monitoring network. My command screens filled with failure alerts. Security breach, Sector 5. Containment failure, Zone 9. Power disruption, main grid. The alerts multiplied faster than our systems could process them. But the chaos inside the camps was only the beginning. Beyond the containment facilities, sabotage erupted across the occupation network. Fuel depots exploded without warning. Transportation convoys vanished along supply routes. Power plants supplying Dominion bases suddenly shut down. In one region, a human maintenance crew deliberately overloaded a generator core, destroying an entire garrison in the resulting blast. The incidents were not random. They were targeted, precise. Human resistance cells had infiltrated nearly every system we relied on to control the planet, and they were activating all at once. Dominion command channels filled with urgent transmissions from officers across Earth. Requesting reinforcements. Multiple insurgent attacks underway. Loss of perimeter control. The reports kept coming. Entire cities began rising in revolt. Civilians poured into the streets, attacking Dominion patrols with whatever weapons they could find. Construction machinery smashed armored vehicles. Public transit systems were used to block military roads. In several regions, human police forces that had surrendered weeks earlier suddenly turned their weapons on our occupation troops. Our soldiers were confused. Nothing in their training prepared them for this kind of enemy. Most species valued survival above all else. When faced with overwhelming force, they surrendered. Humans were different. They valued something else, freedom, and they were willing to die for it. I watched one battle unfold through a drone feed. Above a containment camp, a group of unarmed civilians charged toward a Dominion barricade. Energy blasts cut through them instantly, yet the survivors kept advancing, climbing over the fallen bodies of their own people, moving forward no matter how many died. The soldiers eventually retreated, not because they were defeated, but because they could not comprehend what they were facing. Within hours, the Dominion occupation forces began losing control of Earth. Entire sectors went dark as communication networks failed. Human fighters seized abandoned equipment. Some even captured Dominion weapons and turned them against our own troops. But the greatest shock came from beyond the planet itself. Our orbital sensors suddenly detected multiple transmissions originating from hidden satellites. Small human devices that had somehow escaped destruction during the initial invasion. One by one, they activated. The signals spread outward from Earth in all directions. Deep space communication bursts, traveling across the solar system. Dominion analysts intercepted fragments of the transmissions. Emergency codes, navigation coordinates, military frequencies. At first, the meaning was unclear. Then, the translation algorithms completed their analysis. The signals had been prepared decades earlier, long before the Dominion ever discovered Earth. Humanity had created a contingency plan for planetary invasion, and now that plan was active. The message spreading through space carried only one instruction: a call, not to surrender, not to negotiate, a call to fight. Across the command chamber, Dominion officers stared at the decoded signal in silence, because the message meant only one thing: every human ship in the solar system, every hidden outpost, every surviving military unit had just received the same order: return to Earth. The war had begun, and humanity had just summoned every force it had left. At first, Dominion High Command believed the rebellion would collapse within hours. History suggested it would. Every conquered civilization occasionally produces desperate revolts in the early days of occupation. Emotional outbursts, chaotic, violence, uncoordinated uprisings driven by grief and anger. They always fail. Against a disciplined interstellar military, civilians cannot win. The Dominion fleet still controlled Earth's orbit. Our warships hovered above the planet like silent gods, armed with weapons capable of reducing continents to ash. Our ground forces possessed armor, shields, and energy rifles far beyond human technology. By every measurable advantage, the outcome of the rebellion was already decided. The humans simply did not know it yet. But within hours, the reports arriving in the command chamber began telling a different story. The rebellion was not collapsing. It was spreading. Across the planet, Dominion communication nodes began failing at alarming speed. Entire sections of the occupation network disappeared from the tactical displays. At first, engineers blamed sabotage, but as new data arrived, the truth became stranger. Human technicians were not simply destroying our systems. They were studying them. In one captured supply depot, a group of human engineers dismantled a Dominion power generator using nothing more than handheld tools. Within hours, they had learned enough to overload the system and create a localized electromagnetic pulse that disabled an entire garrison. In another region, resistance fighters captured a damaged Dominion transport vehicle. Instead of destroying it, they repaired it. 3 days later, the same vehicle was used to infiltrate a military checkpoint and free hundreds of prisoners. Human adaptability was terrifying. Most species struggled to understand foreign technology without extensive training. Humans seemed to learn through experimentation. They dismantled everything they captured. They tested every component. They made mistakes, many mistakes, but they learned from each one, and they learned fast. Soon, Dominion weapons began appearing in human hands. Energy rifles taken from fallen soldiers. Shield generators ripped from damaged vehicles. In several cities, resistance groups managed to activate abandoned combat drones and turn them against our own patrols. The tactical displays inside the command chamber became increasingly chaotic. Red markers, indicating hostile human activity, spread across the planet like wildfire. But the ground war was only one part of the disaster unfolding. Above the atmosphere, the Dominion fleet continued monitoring the planet with confidence. Human resistance might cause temporary problems on the surface, but without orbital support, they could never truly threaten us. Then the first aircraft attack occurred. A single human fighter jet emerged from the clouds beneath one of our patrol ships. The aircraft was old, an outdated machine from Earth's previous wars. Its weapon systems had been damaged during the invasion. Yet the pilot still climbed directly toward our ship. Dominion targeting systems locked onto the aircraft instantly. A point defense cannon fired. The jet's wing exploded, but the pilot did not eject. Instead, the aircraft continued climbing, straight toward the hull of the patrol vessel. The collision shook the entire ship. The impact did little physical damage to the armored plating, but it forced the vessel to break formation. Moments later, 3 more human aircraft appeared from different directions. 2 were destroyed before reaching their targets. The third rammed directly into the ship's sensor array. The vessel lost visual scanning capability. Within minutes, resistance forces on the ground launched an assault on a nearby Dominion base that had depended on that sensor network for security. It fell within the hour. The attacks continued. Old cargo planes loaded with explosives. Helicopters carrying human fighters who leaped onto Dominion vehicles from above. Civilian drones modified into crude bombs. The methods were inefficient, often suicidal. But they worked. Every day, the Dominion lost more equipment, more bases, more control, and the humans kept adapting. I remember reviewing a report from a battlefield outside what humans called Berlin, a group of resistance fighters. Most of them civilians had captured a Dominion artillery unit. None of them had ever operated such a weapon before. But they studied its controls, experimented with the targeting system. Within hours, they were firing it. The artillery barrage destroyed an entire Dominion armored convoy attempting to reinforce the region. When I read the personnel data of the fighters responsible for the attack, I felt something unfamiliar. Confusion. The group included a farmer, a school teacher, a university student, a mechanic. None of them had military training, yet they fought like soldiers. They fought like veterans. And worst of all, they refused to retreat. Dominion troops reported the same pattern across every continent. Human fighters would charge into battle even when the odds were impossible, even when defeat was certain, even when death was inevitable. Because to them, surrender was worse. Our soldiers began hesitating during combat, not because they feared losing, but because they did not understand their enemy. What kind of species fights this way? What kind of civilization teaches its civilians to become warriors overnight? Then the sensors detected something else. At first, it appeared as a series of small signals approaching the solar system's inner orbit. Dominion long-range scanners identified dozens of vessels moving toward Earth, then hundreds, then thousands. The ships were not military craft. They lacked weapon systems. Their hull designs were crude and inefficient: mining vessels, cargo transports, commercial freighters, civilian ships. Every human vessel within range of Earth was returning to the planet. They came from asteroid mining colonies, from research stations orbiting distant moons, from trade routes that stretched across the solar system. Most carried no weapons. Some had barely functional engines, yet they all moved toward the same destination: Earth. Dominion officers stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. No species would send unarmed civilian ships into a war zone against an interstellar fleet. It was irrational, suicidal. But the humans were coming anyway. Thousands of ships accelerating toward the battlefield. Pilots who knew they were outmatched, who knew they would likely die. Yet they continued forward, because their home was under attack, and that was enough. For the first time in Dominion history, our officers began to feel something they had never experienced during an invasion: fear. Not of the humans' weapons, not of their technology, but of the humans themselves. Because the species we had conquered had decided they would rather die fighting than live under our rule. At first, the Dominion fleet did not take the approaching human ships seriously. Why would we? Our armada consisted of heavily armed interstellar warships, vessels built to conquer civilizations. Their hulls carried planet-killing cannons, shield, generators strong enough to withstand nuclear bombardment, and targeting systems capable of destroying enemy craft before they even entered visual range. The incoming human vessels were cargo ships, mining transports, civilian freighters barely, designed for combat conditions. Some of them did not even carry defensive shields. Yet they kept coming. Hundreds of small blips on the long-range scanners slowly converging on Earth. Dominion officers initially categorized them as evacuation craft, desperate civilians trying to flee the chaos unfolding on the surface. But the trajectories told a different story. The ships were not leaving. They were accelerating toward us, toward the fleet, toward the battlefield. The first wave arrived 3 days after the rebellion began. A loose formation of battered cargo vessels emerged from behind Earth's moon and burned toward the nearest Dominion cruiser group. Our targeting systems locked onto them instantly. Point defense cannons opened fire. Several human ships exploded in seconds. Others continued forward. The pilots did not attempt evasive maneuvers. They did not attempt communication. They simply accelerated, straight toward the Dominion warships. "Are they attacking?" one officer asked quietly inside. "The command chamber." The answer came moments later. The lead human cargo vessel slammed directly into the hull of a Dominion cruiser. The impact was catastrophic, not for the cruiser's armor, but for its external weapon systems. The collision ripped apart multiple turret mounts and destabilized the ship's shielding array. Before the cruiser could recover, 2 more civilian ships struck it from opposite directions. The explosions illuminated Earth's orbit like miniature suns. Dominion crews watched in stunned silence. This was not warfare. This was sacrifice. More human ships arrived every hour. Mining vessels modified with crude explosive charges. Cargo freighters carrying makeshift armor plates welded across their hulls. Small personal craft piloted by volunteers who knew they would never return. They attacked without hesitation. Some rammed Dominion cruisers directly. Others launched boarding attempts using improvised docking clamps. Several human ships even carried captured Dominion weapons that resistance fighters had somehow managed to install. None of the attacks were elegant. None followed recognizable military doctrine, but the effect was undeniable. The Dominion fleet began losing control of the orbital battlefield. Damaged ships drifted out of formation. Weapon systems malfunctioned under constant harassment. Shield generators overloaded after absorbing repeated impacts. Meanwhile, on the planet below, human. Resistance fighters continued capturing Dominion bases. Every victory on the surface allowed them to launch new attacks into orbit. Missile batteries originally built for Earth's defense were reactivated. Captured Dominion artillery was turned skyward, bit by bit. Orbital dominance began to shift. Inside the command chamber, I studied the tactical map with growing disbelief. Human ships were still arriving from across the solar system. Hundreds, then thousands. A continuous stream of civilian vessels throwing themselves into a war they had no chance of winning. Or so we believed. But something else was happening inside the Dominion fleet. A psychological shift. Our soldiers had fought countless enemies across the galaxy. Every species we conquered eventually behaved the same way. They tried to survive. They tried to negotiate. They tried to preserve what little remained of their civilization. Humans were different. They were not trying to survive. They were trying to win. Even if the cost was their entire species. That realization spread through the fleet like a slow poison. Dominion officers began hesitating during combat operations. Targeting crews paused before firing on civilian ships. Some commanders questioned the orders to hold orbit. Because the humans' behavior defied every rule of warfare we understood. Most species feared extinction. Humans feared surrender more. Their entire civilization had been built on overcoming impossible odds, plagues, wars, natural disasters. Each catastrophe had forced them to adapt, to endure, to fight. And now the Dominion had awakened the strongest instinct their species possessed: defiance. The first retreat happened during the 6th day of the orbital conflict. A Dominion flagship, one of the most powerful vessels in the fleet, suffered heavy damage after repeated ramming attacks from human cargo ships. Its shield grid collapsed. Multiple weapon systems were disabled. The ship's commander made a decision that had not occurred in Dominion history for centuries. He ordered a retreat. The massive warship turned away from Earth and began accelerating toward deep space. For several seconds, no one in the fleet reacted. Then another cruiser followed. Then another. Once the first ships fled, the formation collapsed. Dominion vessels began withdrawing from orbit one by one. Some carried heavy damage. Others were nearly untouched. But the psychological balance had shifted. Our fleet was no longer certain of victory. And uncertainty was something the Dominion had never been trained to handle. From the surface of Earth, human resistance fighters watched the sky as the enormous alien ships slowly turned away. At first, they did not understand what was happening. Then the realization spread. The conquerors were leaving. The unstoppable Dominion Armada was retreating. Human survivors gathered in the streets and across the battle-scarred landscapes of their world. Some stared upward in disbelief. Others cheered. Many simply stood in silence, watching the enemy disappear into the darkness of space. They had not destroyed the Dominion fleet. They had not conquered the invaders. But they had done something far more shocking. They had broken them, not with superior weapons, not with advanced technology, but with something the Dominion had never faced before. A species that refused to bow. And as the final warships vanished beyond Earth's orbit, I realized the terrible truth. The Dominion had conquered the planet. But the humans had conquered something far more important: our certainty. Weeks passed. The Dominion fleet had withdrawn from Earth. Despite retaining overwhelming military power, armadas that could annihilate entire continents in a single salvo, the cost of occupation had become unbearable. Every Dominion command report bore the same grim truth. Humans could not be controlled. Every prison camp was a fortress, every city a battlefield, every civilian a potential warrior. Commander Virek watched the retreat from orbit. The solar system shimmered below him, scarred and battered, yet alive. Humanity had endured. Humanity had fought. Humanity had won, not through the power of their weapons, but through something far older, far stronger than technology. Fearlessness. Across the galaxy, the story spread like a supernova. Analysts, historians, and politicians from countless worlds transmitted accounts of what had occurred on Earth. A primitive species, one the Dominion had dismissed as insignificant, had forced a galactic empire to retreat. Not with superior numbers, not with advanced technology, but with courage, ingenuity, and relentless defiance. Some alien civilizations were fascinated. They began studying humans in detail, patterns of behavior, social organization, historical records, survival strategies. Others were terrified. They realized that a species capable of facing annihilation without hesitation posed an existential threat to any empire, and many began quietly forming alliances with the emerging power from Earth, sensing a new force shaping the balance of the galaxy. In his private logs, Commander Virek reflected on the magnitude of what had happened. Every operation, every tactical assumption, every doctrine of conquest had failed here. The Dominion had made a single critical error. It had assumed that conquering land meant conquering the people who lived on it. Humans did not measure victory the same way. To them, victory was not measured in territory or power, but in refusal. Refusal to submit. Refusal to surrender. That simple, unyielding principle had transformed them into the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever encountered. The costs to humanity had been immense. Cities lay in ruins. Millions had perished. Yet in that sacrifice, they had achieved something far greater than survival. They had earned the galaxy's respect and its fear. Virek recorded his final report, his voice solemn. The Dominion conquered Earth, he wrote, but in doing so, it awakened something far older and far stronger than fear. It awakened humanity's greatest weapon, its spirit. From the ashes of destruction, from the fires of resistance, a new era began. Humanity had survived. Humanity had fought. And humanity had signaled to every intelligent species in the galaxy that Earth was no longer a backwater world. It was the beginning of a force that would not be stopped. The age of human expansion had begun. Galactic historians would later call it the moment when the galaxy first realized a simple, terrifying truth. No empire, no matter how powerful, could conquer a species that refused to be conquered. Commander Virek looked one last time at the blue and green sphere below him. The humans were rebuilding already, streets cleared, communications restored, technology repurposed. Life continuing, relentless, unstoppable. He closed the log, and for the first time in his long career, he felt something he had never imagined. Respect. Fear. Yes, but deeper than that, awe. Because humanity had won not by defeating an empire. They had won by refusing to be defeated, and now the galaxy would never forget them.